You know what they say about humans? They say humans are soft, fragile, weak little creatures who break if you sneeze too hard in their direction. Well, let me tell you something about that particular misconception, because I am Vortex Prime 7, and I was there when everything we thought we knew about the fragile species went straight to the incinerator. The whole mess started on Kepler Station, a massive trading hub floating in the Andorian sector, where every species with half a brain cell comes to conduct business. Think of it as the galaxy's biggest marketplace, except instead of selling fruit and pottery, we are dealing in weapons-grade plutonium and diplomatic immunity passes. You know, the usual civilized commerce. I ran, security for the station's most exclusive district, where the council's offspring come to play at being adults, while daddy's money keeps them out of real trouble. Easy job, decent pay, and all I had to do was make sure the little monsters did not accidentally declare war on each other while shopping for overpriced luxury items. That particular rotation cycle, we had the cream of the Galactic crop visiting. Lord Bantor's triplets, each one more spoiled and vicious than the last. Lady Screech's youngest, who had already killed 3 tutors and was working on her 4th. And the prize of the collection, Prince Razortooth 6, heir to the carnivore dynasty, who could disembowel a full-grown Thracian with his breakfast spoon. These were not children in any sense that a reasonable being would understand. These were apex predators in training, genetically engineered killing machines who happened to be small enough to fit through standard doorways. Each one could have taken apart a squad of trained soldiers without breaking what passed for a sweat in their respective anatomies. And then there was Elena Torres. Now, Elena was what you might call an anomaly in our little corner of predator paradise. She was human, for starters, which already made her about as threatening as a particularly soft cushion. But more than that, she was nice. And I do not mean nice in that calculating, manipulative way that politicians are nice. I mean genuinely, impossibly, stupidly nice. She worked as a cultural liaison, which is basically a fancy title for professional babysitter to homicidal alien royalty. Her job was to make sure the council's precious offspring learned about diversity and interspecies cooperation and other concepts that make seasoned warriors break out in hives. Elena stood maybe 5.5 feet tall, weighed about as much as one of Prince Razortooth 6's casual snacks, and had absolutely no natural weapons to speak of. No claws, no fangs, no venom sacs, no ability to breathe fire or shoot acid or any of the other basics that any self-respecting predator takes for granted. What she did have was this absolutely insane habit of treating the deadliest creatures in known space like they were just regular kids having a bad day. "Good morning, Prince Razortooth 6, she would chirp, completely ignoring the fact that the young carnivore was currently using his claws to carve threatening messages into a titanium wall. "Are you ready for today's lesson on conflict resolution?" The prince would turn those 6 glowing red eyes on her, extending his claws to their full terrifying length, and Elena would just smile. Not the nervous, forced smile of someone trying to avoid becoming lunch, but a genuine, warm expression that somehow made the massive predator retract his claws and mumble something about being ready to learn. It was the most ridiculous thing I had ever witnessed, and I had once seen a void stalker try to flirt with a neutron star. But here's the thing about Elena Torres that took me way too long to figure out. She was not oblivious to the danger. She knew exactly what these creatures were capable of. She just did not care. Not in the sense that she had a death wish, but in the sense that she had decided these particular monsters were her responsibility, and Elena Torres did not abandon her responsibilities. Ever. Which brings us to the day when that philosophy nearly got her killed, and simultaneously changed everything about how the galaxy views humans. It started like any other cycle. Elena arrived at the education center precisely on time, carrying her usual collection of teaching materials and wearing that same impossible smile. The predator cubs were already there, arranged in what looked like a casual circle, but was actually a complex territorial display designed to minimize the chances of anyone getting eaten before lunch. "Today," Elena announced, completely oblivious to the low-level growling contest happening between Lord Bantor's triplets, "we are going to learn about emergency response protocols." Prince Razortooth 6 looked up from his breakfast, which appeared to be some kind of still-living crustacean that was putting up a valiant but doomed fight. Why would we need to learn about emergencies? We are the emergencies. Elena laughed, and it was not the polite, nervous laughter of someone trying to diffuse tension. It was genuine amusement. That is exactly why you need to learn about this, Your Highness. Because when you are the most dangerous thing in the room, other people look to you for protection. Protection? Lady Screech's youngest hissed, her poisonous quills extending slightly. We do not protect. We hunt. Sometimes, Elena said gently. The best hunters are also the best protectors. Now I want you to understand something about the next part of this story. What happened next was not some elaborate setup or carefully planned training exercise. It was not a test or a simulation or any kind of controlled environment. It was just the galaxy's worst possible timing colliding with the universe's most twisted sense of humor. The explosion came without warning. One moment, Elena was explaining the difference between tactical withdrawal and strategic retreat to a group of creatures who considered both concepts roughly equivalent to admitting weakness. The next moment, the entire east wall of the education center was gone, replaced by a cloud of superheated debris and the distinctive smell of melted metal. Through the smoke and chaos, I could see the source of the problem. A cargo hauler had suffered what the engineers like to call catastrophic structural failure, which is a polite way of saying it had turned into a very large, very angry fireball. The explosion had torn through 3 levels of the station, and the shockwave was sending chunks of twisted metal spinning through the education center like the galaxy's deadliest confetti. The predator cubs reacted exactly as you would expect apex killing machines to react when suddenly faced with mortal danger. They scattered, using their natural speed and agility to avoid the incoming debris with the kind of fluid grace that evolution spends millions of years perfecting. All except one. Lord Bantor's youngest triplet, a creature we called Spike for obvious reasons, had been standing too close to the blast zone. The concussion had knocked him senseless, and he was lying motionless in the direct path of a piece of hull plating roughly the size of a small shuttle. Now, here is where any rational being would have made a simple calculation. One unconscious predator cub versus the certain death that comes from trying to intercede in the path of high-velocity space debris. The math is not complicated, and the answer is, let natural selection handle it. Elena Torres apparently never learned how to do that particular type of math. I watched, with the kind of horrible fascination usually reserved for stellar collapses and political campaigns, as this tiny human female sprinted directly into the path of incoming doom. She did not hesitate, did not pause to consider the odds, did not even slow down to think about what she was doing. She just ran. Elena reached Spike just as the hull fragment arrived, and for a moment, physics took over. The debris struck her square in the back with enough force to lift her off her feet and send her tumbling across the floor like a broken doll. But here is the thing about that moment of impact. Elena had managed to push Spike out of the way first. The piece of hull plating that should have turned a young predator into paste instead embedded itself in the floor where he had been lying, while the most fragile being in the room absorbed the full force of an impact that should have killed her instantly. Should have, but did not. When the emergency response teams finally arrived and cleared away the debris, they found Elena Torres lying unconscious in a pool of her own blood, her body riddled with shrapnel and her vital signs barely registering on their instruments. But she was alive, which according to every medical expert who examined her, should have been completely impossible. More importantly, she was alive because she had chosen to be. Because when faced with a choice between her own safety and the life of a creature that most beings would consider a monster, Elena Torres had decided that the monster was worth saving. And that, as it turned out, was the kind of decision that gets the attention of very important people. The council convened within hours of the incident, calling an emergency session that brought together the most powerful beings in known space. Representatives from every major predator species, military commanders who had conquered entire star systems, diplomatic officials who could start or end wars with a casual comment. They came because word had spread about what happened on Kepler Station. Word about a human who had thrown herself into harm's way to save the life of a creature she had no reason to protect, who had faced certain death without hesitation, because she had decided that someone else's life was more important than her own. And as Elena Torres lay unconscious in the medical bay, her body slowly healing from injuries that should have been fatal, the most powerful beings in the galaxy gathered to discuss what this meant. Because if humans were capable of that kind of selfless courage, if they could face down death itself to protect others without a moment's hesitation, then perhaps everything the galaxy thought it knew about the weak species needed to be reconsidered. After all, it takes a very special kind of strength to choose someone else's life over your own. But before the council could even begin their deliberations, something unexpected happened in the medical bay. Something that would make Elena Torres' actions seem even more impossible, if that were somehow possible. Dr. Thranks Val, the station's chief medical officer, and a being who had seen more combat injuries than most war veterans, was running his third diagnostic scan, when he discovered something that made his 4 hearts skip a beat. Elena's body was not just healing from the shrapnel wounds. It was healing wrong. Or rather, it was healing in a way that suggested her physiology was far more complex than anyone had realized. "This is impossible," he muttered, his tentacles dancing across the medical readouts with increasing agitation. Human tissue does not regenerate at this rate. Human bone structure cannot withstand this type of trauma. Human neural pathways should not be showing this level of activity while unconscious. The other medical staff gathered around the diagnostic station, their various appendages clicking and chittering with confusion. Elena Torres was rewriting their understanding of human biology simply by refusing to die properly. "Perhaps," suggested Nurse Calix 9, a delicate flowering who specialized in trauma recovery, "we have underestimated human resilience." Dr. Thranks Val's mandibles clicked dismissively. "Underestimated? We have studied human physiology for decades. They are fragile, short-lived creatures with minimal physical capabilities. They cannot survive in hostile environments, they have no natural weapons, and their healing factor is practically non-existent compared to proper predator species." "And yet," Nurse Calix 9 pointed out with the kind of logic that makes professionals very uncomfortable, "this one is healing from injuries that would have killed most of our council members." Meanwhile, in the corridor outside the medical bay, word of Elena's condition was spreading like wildfire through the station. The predator cubs she had been teaching were maintaining a vigil outside her room, despite repeated attempts by their various guardians and handlers to remove them. Prince Razortooth 6 had planted himself directly in front of the medical bay doors and was growling at anyone who suggested he should leave. His 6 eyes never left the entrance, and his claws remained extended in a defensive posture that clearly communicated his intentions to anyone foolish enough to try and move him. "She saved Spike," he kept repeating to anyone who would listen. "She saved one of us. Humans do not do that. Prey does not protect predators." But she did. Lord Bantor's other 2 triplets had positioned themselves on either side of the prince, creating a formidable barrier of young predatory fury. Lady Screech's offspring had claimed the ceiling space above the door, her poisonous quills creating a lovely rainbow pattern of threat display. Even little Spike himself, still groggy from the concussion but mobile enough to be stubborn, had insisted on joining the vigil. The cub who Elena had nearly died to save was now refusing to leave her side, despite the fact that his parents were sending increasingly urgent messages demanding his immediate return home. "I do not understand," Spike said to anyone who would listen, his young voice carrying a confusion that went far beyond the head injury. "She could have saved herself. She could have run away. Why did she choose to save me instead?" It was a question that none of the adults seemed able to answer. Because in their experience, when faced with a choice between personal safety and the welfare of another species, beings chose themselves. Every time. It was not cruelty or callousness. It was simple survival instinct. But Elena Torres had apparently missed that lesson in basic galactic biology. The kind of strength that empires are built on. The answer came 18 hours later, when Elena's eyes finally opened. Dr. Thranks Val came bursting through the medical bay doors like his tail was on fire. "She's awake, and she is asking about the cubs." Prince Razortooth 6 was on his feet immediately, moving toward the entrance. "We must see her." "Absolutely not," Dr. Threnksval protested, spreading his arms wide to block the doorway. She requires complete rest. No visitors. Elena Torres appeared in the doorway behind him, leaning against the frame, but upright and conscious. "Hi, kids," she said, and her voice was exactly the same as always. Warm, gentle, completely unaware that she had just performed a miracle by surviving what should have been certain death. "Is everyone okay?" The silence that followed was the kind that usually precedes either divine revelation or complete societal collapse. Here was this tiny human female, her body still wrapped in medical bandages, asking if the creatures she had nearly died to protect were all right. Spike was the first to break. The young predator launched himself at Elena with a sound that was part sob, part roar, and entirely heartbreaking. She caught him despite her injuries, wrapping her arms around his armored form like he was just a scared child instead of a genetically engineered killing machine. "Thank you," he whispered into her shoulder, and those two words carried more genuine emotion than I had heard from any predator species in my entire career. That was when the delegation arrived. The council had sent their most senior representatives, beings whose names were spoken in whispers across the galaxy. Supreme Commander Talon Death Prime, whose military campaigns had conquered 17 systems. Diplomatic Chancellor Void Whisper 9, who could end civilizations with a carefully worded trade agreement. High Arbiter Bone Crusher Eternal, whose legal decisions had reshaped interstellar law for centuries. They came expecting to find Elena Torres unconscious, possibly dying, certainly incapacitated. What they found instead was a human woman sitting on the floor of a medical bay corridor, surrounded by the most dangerous young predators in known space, reading them a story about friendship and courage. "Elena Torres," Supreme Commander Talon Death Prime said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. Elena looked up from her book, and I swear by my mother's nesting grounds, she actually smiled at them. "Oh, hello. You must be here about the incident. I hope I did not cause too much trouble." Trouble. She hoped she had not caused trouble. The woman had just redefined what the galaxy thought it knew about human capability, and she was worried about causing trouble. Diplomatic Chancellor Void Whisper 9 stepped forward, her multiple sensory organs focused intently on Elena. "We have come to discuss your actions during the emergency situation." "My actions?" Elena blinked, genuine confusion crossing her features. "I just did what anyone would do. Spike was in danger, so I helped him. It is not really that complicated. What anyone would do." High Arbiter Bone Crusher Eternal's voice carried undertones that could make lesser beings spontaneously confess to crimes they had not committed. "Miss Torres, in the recorded history of interspecies interaction, there has never been a documented case of a prey species deliberately endangering itself to protect a predator species." Elena was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then she looked down at Spike, who was still pressed against her side like he was afraid she might disappear. "Well," she said finally, "maybe it is time to start." That simple statement hit the assembled council representatives like a photon torpedo. Here was a member of a species they had classified as weak, calmly suggesting that everything they thought they knew about the natural order was wrong. Supreme Commander Talon Death Prime cleared his throat. "Miss Torres, your species has been classified as Level 7 sentience. How do you explain your survival of injuries that would have been fatal to most Level 2 sentients?" Elena considered this question with the same thoughtful expression she used when the cubs asked her why the sky was blue or how gravity worked. "I think maybe you have been asking the wrong questions," she said eventually. "You keep trying to figure out what makes humans weak, but maybe you should be asking what makes us strong." "And what?" Diplomatic Chancellor Void Whisper 9 asked with the kind of careful precision that suggested she already suspected the answer might be important. "Makes humans strong?" Elena looked around at the predator cubs surrounding her, these creatures that had been designed by evolution to be perfect killing machines, who were now listening to her with the kind of attention usually reserved for pack leaders or parental figures. "We care," she said simply, "about everything, about everyone. Even when it does not make sense, even when it is dangerous, even when people tell us we should not. We care so much that we will throw ourselves in front of explosions to protect someone else's child, even if that child belongs to a species that most of the galaxy considers monsters. Prince Razortooth 6 shifted beside her, his 6 eyes reflecting something that looked suspiciously like pride. She is not wrong. Humans do care, even when they should not. High Arbiter Bone Crusher. Eternal leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the corridor. Caring is not a survival trait. Emotional attachment leads to poor decision-making and increased vulnerability. Does it? Elena asked, and her voice carried just a hint of challenge. Because last I checked, I am still alive. Spike is still alive, and everyone learned something important about what it means to protect each other. The 3 council representatives exchanged glances that carried entire conversations. These were beings who had spent centuries studying warfare, diplomacy, and law. They understood power in all its forms, recognized strength in all its manifestations, and they were slowly beginning to realize that they had completely misunderstood what made humans dangerous. Supreme Commander Talondeath Prime spoke first, his voice carrying a note of respect that had not been there before. Miss Torres, would you be willing to answer some questions about human defensive capabilities? For research purposes, of course. Elena laughed, and the sound was exactly the same as always. Warm, genuine, completely unpretentious. Sure. But I should warn you, I'm not really a soldier or anything. I just teach kids. Well, I guess they are not exactly kids, but you know what I mean. Yes, Diplomatic Chancellor Void Whisper 9 said quietly. We are beginning to understand exactly what you mean. Over the next several hours, Elena Torres sat in that medical bay corridor and answered questions that would fundamentally reshape the galaxy's understanding of human nature. She talked about human history, about their tendency to adopt orphaned animals from other species, about their inexplicable habit of forming emotional bonds with beings that could kill them without effort. She explained pack bonding, the human tendency to treat anyone they cared about as family, regardless of species, origin, or evolutionary history. She described their protective instincts, which apparently had no natural limits and could be triggered by anyone they perceived as needing help. Most importantly, she talked about human stubbornness, their absolute refusal to give up on anything or anyone they had decided was worth protecting. You see, she said, gently stroking Spike's armored hide while he dozed against her shoulder. Humans do not think about species classifications or threat assessments when someone is in danger. We just think about helping. It is probably not very practical, but it is who we are. By the time the formal interview was concluded, the 3 council representatives looked like beings who had just discovered that their fundamental understanding of reality needed some serious revision. As they prepared to leave, High Arbiter Bone Crusher Eternal paused at the medical bay entrance. Miss Torres, he said, one final question. Knowing what you know now about the risks involved, would you make the same choice again? Elena looked down at the young predator sleeping peacefully in her arms, then around at the other cubs who had refused to leave her side. Every time, she said without hesitation. These are my kids. You do not abandon family. The 3 council representatives left Kepler Station that day with a new understanding of why humans had survived and thrived despite their apparent physical limitations. They had discovered that humans possessed something far more dangerous than claws or fangs or natural armor. They had hope. They had stubbornness. They had an absolutely unshakable belief that everyone deserved protection, regardless of whether they could protect themselves. And most terrifyingly of all, they had the courage to act on those beliefs, even when it meant facing certain death. Within a standard galactic month, human classification was officially changed from Level 7 sentience to Level 1 adaptive protectors, a completely new category created specifically to account for their unique capabilities. The official documentation noted that while humans possessed minimal natural weapons and limited physical defenses, they demonstrated unprecedented levels of protective behavior toward other species and showed remarkable resilience when defending others. Unofficially, the Council had reached a much simpler conclusion. Any species crazy enough to throw themselves in front of explosions to protect someone else's children was not to be underestimated. Ever. Elena Torres returned to her teaching duties the following week, completely unaware that she had single-handedly rewritten Galactic policy. The predator cubs, however, never forgot what she had done for them, and neither did their parents. Which is how Elena Torres, a human female who weighed less than most beings' casual snacks, became the first non-predator species to receive honorary membership in the Apex Council. After all, anyone willing to take shrapnel for your children clearly understands what family really means. But the story did not end there. Oh no. Because when you fundamentally alter the galaxy's understanding of an entire species, there are consequences. And those consequences tend to arrive in the form of very large, very angry delegations demanding explanations. 3 days after Elena returned to her teaching duties, Kepler Station received the most intimidating visitor manifest in recorded history. The Ravager High Command had dispatched a full battle fleet for diplomatic consultations because Prince Razortooth VI had told his father about his amazing teacher. Emperor Fang Render Absolute arrived expecting to find his son held captive by some sort of human mind control specialist. What he found instead was his heir sitting in a circle with other predator cubs, enthusiastically participating in what Elena called conflict resolution through interpretive dance. Fascinating, Elena was saying as I watched from the observation deck, because there was no way I was missing this particular train wreck. Now, Prince Razortooth VI, can you show us how anger looks when it is trying to become understanding? The young Ravager, heir to a dynasty of killers, began what could only be described as the most terrifying ballet in galactic history. His 6 eyes closed in concentration as he moved his massive frame through a series of poses that somehow managed to convey complex emotional states through pure physical expression. Emperor Fang Render Absolute watched this display for exactly 37 seconds before his worldview suffered what engineers call complete structural failure. "What?" he rumbled in a voice that could shatter mountains. "Is my son doing?" Elena looked up with that same cheerful smile, apparently oblivious to facing a being who had personally conquered 12 systems. "Oh, hello. You must be Prince Razortooth VI's father. I am Elena Torres, and we are working on emotional intelligence development." The Emperor stared at her with the expression of someone who had just been told that gravity was optional. "Emotional intelligence? Well, yes. Your son is incredibly bright, but like most highly capable predators, he sometimes has trouble processing complex social situations. So we practice expressing feelings through movement. It helps with communication skills and empathy development." Emperor Fang Render Absolute's mandibles worked silently for several moments. This was a being who had built an empire through strategic warfare and political intimidation, and he was watching his son learn empathy from a human female who weighed less than his ceremonial armor. "My son," he said carefully, "is the heir to the most feared predator dynasty in known space." "Yes, and he is doing wonderfully with his leadership training. Just yesterday, he successfully mediated a territorial dispute between Lord Bantor's triplets without anyone getting seriously injured. I am very proud of him." Prince Razortooth VI preened at the praise, his massive frame practically glowing with pride. "Elena says I have excellent potential for diplomatic leadership. She is teaching me about something called constructive conflict resolution." The Emperor looked like he was having some sort of internal crisis. "Diplomatic leadership?" "Oh yes," Elena continued, apparently unaware that she was casually revolutionizing an entire imperial philosophy. "The old model of ruling through fear and intimidation is terribly inefficient. Modern leadership is about inspiring loyalty through competence and caring. Your son has natural charisma. He just needs to learn how to channel it constructively." That was when Lady Screech herself materialized in the doorway, her poisonous quills creating a magnificent threat display that would have sent most beings running for their lives. The matriarch of the toxic dynasty had come to investigate reports that her daughter was being corrupted by mammalian philosophy. "Where?" she hissed, her voice capable of dissolving metal at close range. "Is the human responsible for contaminating my offspring with weakness?" Elena waved cheerfully from her position on the floor. "Hi there. You must be here about the intergenerational communication workshop. I am Elena Torres, and I have been working with your daughter on assertiveness training." "Assertiveness training?" Lady Screech's quills extended to their full lethal length. My daughter does not require training in assertiveness. She is a born killer. Well, yes, but being able to kill things and being able to effectively communicate your needs are different skill sets. Your daughter is incredibly intelligent, but she was using aggression as her primary communication method. We have been working on expanding her emotional vocabulary. As if summoned by the conversation, Lady Screech's offspring appeared beside Elena. Her own quills retracted and her posture relaxed. Mother, Elena has been teaching me about something called appropriate responses to frustration. Did you know that not every social interaction requires the use of lethal force? Lady Screech stared at her daughter with the expression of someone watching their entire belief system crumble into dust. What? What did you just say? I said that sometimes you can solve problems without killing anyone. Elena showed me how to use words to express dissatisfaction, instead of just poisoning everything in sight. It is actually much more efficient. The young predator turned to Elena with obvious affection. Tell her about the de-escalation techniques we practiced. Elena beamed with pride. Oh, she has been making remarkable progress. Just this morning, she successfully negotiated a resource-sharing agreement with the Thracian delegation without a single casualty. I am so proud of how she has grown. By the time Lord Bantor arrived to check on his triplets, the education center had become the site of what could only be described as the most surreal parent-teacher conference in galactic history. 3 of the most feared rulers in known space stood in a circle around Elena Torres, listening with growing amazement as she explained their children's educational progress. The thing you have to understand, Elena was saying, completely oblivious to the historical significance of the moment, is that your children are not just predators. They are incredibly intelligent, emotionally complex beings with enormous potential for growth. They just needed someone to believe in them and give them the tools to express themselves constructively. Express themselves constructively, Emperor Fang Render Absolute repeated, like he was testing the words in an alien language. Exactly. Take Prince Razortooth 6, for instance. He has natural leadership abilities and excellent strategic thinking skills. But he was defaulting to intimidation because that was the only tool he had been given. Now that he understands alternatives, he can choose the most effective approach for each situation. Prince Razortooth 6 nodded enthusiastically. Elena taught me about cost-benefit analysis and conflict resolution. Did you know that most territorial disputes can be solved through resource redistribution rather than combat? It saves time and reduces the risk of injury to valuable personnel. His father stared at him like he had grown an extra head. You solved a territorial dispute through resource redistribution? Yes, and everyone was satisfied with the outcome. Elena says that effective leadership is about finding solutions that benefit everyone involved, not just demonstrating superior force. Lady Screech was having a similar conversation with her daughter, who was enthusiastically explaining the principles of mutually beneficial negotiation and sustainable conflict resolution. Lord Bantor arrived just in time to hear his triplets giving a detailed presentation on collaborative problem-solving strategies and the importance of emotional intelligence in leadership development. The 3 rulers looked at each other, then at Elena, then at their children, who were clearly thriving under her guidance. Miss Torres, Emperor Fang Render Absolute said finally, "What exactly are you teaching our children?" Elena tilted her head thoughtfully. How to be the kind of leaders that people choose to follow, instead of the kind that people follow because they are afraid. Your children are going to inherit tremendous power and responsibility. I am just helping them understand how to use those gifts wisely. That evening, the 3 most powerful predator dynasties held an emergency summit to discuss education policy and child development. The meeting concluded with a unanimous decision to restructure their educational systems along human pedagogical principles. Elena Torres continued teaching her classes, completely unaware that she had sparked the most significant educational revolution in galactic history. After all, anyone willing to take shrapnel for your children clearly understands what family really means.